With the Major League Baseball general managers meetings going on this week in Las Vegas, are the Cardinals any closer to swinging a big-time trade that could see a big name leave town this winter? We'll talk about it coming up on B-Schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. Wednesday, November 12th, 2025. Major League Baseball general managers meetings going on this week in Las Vegas, and we're going to talk about a couple of or really three, of the key veterans for the St. Louis Cardinals that could be moved this offseason, and the temperature on all three. Jeff Jones of the Belleville News-Democrat had a really insightful article for the BND on this exact topic, titled "Hot Stove Heats Up as Cardinals Weigh Trade Options for Arenado, Gray, and Contreras." And I think the way that Jeff lined this up in his article for the Belleville News-Democrat, it makes a lot of sense in terms of kind of the likelihood, getting a gauge for what Cardinals fans should really expect when it comes to these three players. Because we know the Cardinals are looking to take kind of more of a step back still, get rid of some payroll, find that foundation with some younger players, and then see what they have in-house and be able to see how quickly they can restock the cupboard in the draft and making moves, free agency, trades, etc. at the appropriate time. But to do that first, I think this offseason is going to involve continuing to kind of trim down what the current roster looks like. So Jeff talks about the three bears of the offseason. You know the story, the three bears, too big, too small, just right. He describes it that the list for Nolan Arenado, it's a big one. He's expecting to be moved, and the Cardinals are expecting to be able to facilitate that for him, and there's a lot of potential places that he would be willing to go. I think it's, again, as I've said, what Jeff is reporting here certainly matches the feeling that I have had about this since standing at Nolan Arenado's locker on the final home game of the regular season in 2025 and hearing him talk about his time with the Cardinals in the very much the past tense. So my full expectation is, and I'm telling you, he will not be at spring training. I know Chaim Bloom has said, look, if we can't get anything done, he's a future Hall of Fame player where we'd be more than happy to have him back in camp and have him on the team next year. I see no path toward Arenado still being a Cardinal next year. It would shock me. I don't know if I said it quite in those that strong of terminology last year at this time. I certainly thought he would be gone. I see literally no path this time around. He's going to go to any team that is even a quasi-contender, because I think when you get to the regular season and you look at what the expected win totals are going to be for this Cardinals roster, it's going to be lower than what it was last year. 76.5, I think, was the preseason number, and I think you're going to get a lower preseason expectation than that this time around. So Arenado knows this is not just like a kind of halfway in, halfway out retool. It's, we're going to be demonstrably worse in the way that we're making moves. Now, that doesn't mean the Cardinals can't exceed expectations with young players and players that don't have contracts rising above their station and putting together a good 2026. But if you're Arenado and where he is at this stage in his career, I think the writing is on the wall for him to be moved and for him to be pretty open to it. And the Cardinals, for their part of it, where Jeff says the team is in a committed lockstep with Arenado when it comes to making that happen, that part of it means they're going to have to eat some money, and I think they kind of realize that. Next on the list is Sonny Gray, who Jeff describes as being more in the middle. The player and the team would be happy to find a deal if one materializes, Jeff writes, but it's not a guarantee, and they're not committing to that having to be the case in Sonny Gray's situation, with him having just 1 year remaining on the deal. It's a lot of money. I think $35 million is the price tag, and there's a buyout on an option as well. And so you're talking about a nice chunk of change, but it's only over the course of 1 year. In that case, I think you look at the season for Arenado last year and the season for Sonny Gray, both disappointing in their own ways, but I think Sonny Gray certainly, given the position he plays and the performance that he put together, more likely to find some suitors in terms of teams maybe being willing to eat some of the money, or I should say, not eat as much as pay for Sonny Gray to be part of their team. It is interesting, though. Arenado was a 1.3 wins above replacement on Baseball Reference last year, and Sonny Gray was a 1.4. So not all too dissimilar. But when you look underlying for Gray, the 180 innings, the 200 strikeouts for the second year in a row, had 14 wins, those are some good stats. 4.28 ERA, and he was a slightly below average pitcher according to ERA+. His ERA+ went from 107 in his first year with the Cardinals down to 96 this past season. So an 11-point drop, and would imply that he was 4% below league average in the way that he performed this past season. Now, I think kind of an outlier again. He had 2 consecutive seasons where the home runs were an outlier. Is that just what he is going to be at this stage of his career? Gave up 25 homers in 2025, gave up 21 homers the previous season. And you would think, like, we were playing half your games at Busch Stadium. On the road, though, he would give up a ton of home runs. I don't know if it was a case of maybe pitching a certain way because you know at home that you can get away with it versus on the road. It's hard to just switch up and change your way that you're approaching things, and then you pay for it a little bit more on the road. I don't know for sure if that's maybe something that happened there, but certainly, we talked about the heat of the summer. Those types of environments were not always kind to Sonny Gray, but I just think about in terms of his value, even though the WAR numbers are pretty similar to Arenado, and the money is more significant on an AAV basis because they're basically owed about the same amount, but Arenado's is stretched over 2 years and Gray's is just over 1. I think when you think about starting pitching and being able to access maybe the upper echelon of what Sonny Gray could bring just a couple of years ago was bringing as the runner-up for the American League Cy Young Award with the Minnesota Twins, I feel like teams are going to be maybe a little bit more willing to take a chance on that and probably pay for that to some extent. Like, I don't know what the number is going to end up being, but if the Cardinals have to eat, $15 million, but they can get out from under the other 25 or whatever it is that something that they would have an appetite for, even if they're not getting some premium return in a trade? Like, I don't know what the scale on how much money the Cardinals eat versus how much they're going to want a premium piece in return for Sonny Gray. I don't know what that line's going to be. With Arenado, I feel pretty confident it's just get him out of here. Whatever the deal that we can get is the one we can get, and we're going to take it. With Sonny, I think there's going to be a little bit more of a willingness for the Cardinals because you need pitching, and I don't want to see ownership just completely sell out and say, oh yeah, we're going to slash the payroll at all costs, and the reward for doing so is, well, there isn't one. We just don't have to pay as much money to our players. That's not going to help Cardinals fans. It would help Cardinals fans to see the team be just as quasi-competitive as it can be. And look, I think Sonny Gray being one of the 5 next year is probably better than what the alternative would be. But also, you would get a look at some of the other candidates within the organization maybe a little bit sooner. I just don't know if those candidates when you think about Quinn Matthews and Liam Doyle, those are kind of the big name guys that they certainly won't want to rush along. But if Sonny's not here, is there another guy that was in Double-A last year or Triple-A last year that we're not really thinking of as being big league ready, but the Cardinals say, this guy may not have the ceiling anyway, and so we're not going to put the kid gloves on him. We're just going to say, look, if he impresses us in spring camp, maybe he wins a job. Maybe it's more like Kyle Leahy, who gets an opportunity because they've got a spot and they're willing to try something. I don't know how much that changes with Gray being here versus him not being here, but I do think the Cardinals' appetite to hold on to him, hopefully, if it's not just a complete payroll dump, would be a little bit higher, and they could pick their spots on to whom they would trade Sonny, which of course he has a say in because of the no trade clause, and whether they trade him at all, or whether they, what if he's able to recover some value because he starts off the 2026 season hot and you trade him midsummer, maybe late June, right before it gets really hot into the dog days and his numbers potentially decline. Maybe the Cardinals look to move Sonny Gray at an opportune time in the middle of the next season where teams are going to be more willing to potentially give some prospects in exchange because once you're halfway through the year, the money that you would have to pick up on that tab is less substantial, and maybe he increases his value between now and then. He could always get hurt, though, and you're on the hook for the whole $40 million. There's risk associated with whatever path you decide to take. But I think that one's going to be the most interesting because I would think that there are some places he would be willing to go, but it's also probably limited because when he signed with St. Louis, part of that conversation was geography. And Jeff writes about that in his article, which I really do recommend, from the Belleville News Democrat. I'll try to link that below here on YouTube so you can give it a look and get the full context of some of the topics we're talking about here. But the Nashville native is obviously relatively close to home in St. Louis when you think about what the options are in this part of the country. There's just not that many teams in the radius that you could draw around Nashville, Tennessee. Atlanta Braves would obviously be another one, and the Braves, had a very disappointing season, but if they're just looking to say, hey, the core of our roster and our organization is still strong, we should have expectations to go right in and contend again in 2026, and we should have, a willingness to spend some money to be able to facilitate that, then maybe the Braves bringing in Walt Weiss as their new manager, so they're making a change at that spot from Brian Snitker. Maybe the Braves are ready to run right back to the top of the NL East, and maybe Sonny Gray would be an option there if they're willing to pick up a decent chunk of the tab and maybe throw the Cardinals a prospect or something of that ilk. Maybe that would be a fit, and Jeff writes about that. He also mentions the Washington Nationals. I'm not sure if I quite see the Nationals being a team as willing to pick up the tab, but that's a bigger market, and they could be closer to thinking they're in a contending window than we've seen in recent years because their young core, all the guys they got from that Juan Soto trade are really starting to contribute. And, maybe they could also flip Mackenzie Gore. That's something that's considered a possibility too. So if they would need a starter, I just don't know how much they're really looking to add a one-year guy, but stranger things have happened. So Sonny Gray, I think his limitation could definitely be related to geography in addition to just the desire to win. Like I thought maybe the Giants would be an option. I don't know as far as the managerial change there, whether that impacts it. Jeff had some thoughts in the article about that maybe not being as plausible of a scenario because of the change in manager. But we'll see with that one. That one's an interesting one. Sonny Gray, whether or not he is around. And I think if he's not, it opens up the possibilities where we go, hey, do the Cardinals do something fun, like sign an extra pitcher? Do they make a trade for somebody that they plug into a spot? Or do we get to see an internal candidate maybe that in years past would not have gotten an opportunity so quickly? But you know what? Other organizations operate that way all the time, and sometimes those guys pan out and sometimes they don't, and then that guy's not somebody you should be waiting around, because I think when you have these pitchers that are prospects and you take 2 to 3 years and they kind of wallow around in AAA, and won't they with his status and whether or not they're going to consider somebody ready, and then a guy comes up, like you've spent the last couple of years, maybe there's a little bit more of an element of he's got it or he doesn't. Sometimes it's about development, but sometimes it's about throwing a guy out there and seeing what he does and adjusting to see if you can't bring the best out of that player. So we'll see what the Cardinals do with that, and if they get an opportunity to move Sonny Gray for fair value. Wilson Contreras is the other, and Jeff writes that his interest in being moved is not particularly high at this point, wants to be in St. Louis. We've known that. It's interesting, too, because he's got the no-trade clause and I think some value as a bat who has consistently performed since he has been with the St. Louis Cardinals. His numbers last year a little bit lower, but still very productive. 791 OPS. He's gone 826, 848, and 791 in his 3 years with the Cardinals. Really solid numbers. Got another 20 home run season under his belt this past year. Ended the year with 80 RBI. That's the highest that he has had in the 3 years with St. Louis. So, yeah, I think Wilson Contreras certainly, would have some value. Maybe a team would do something crazy and put him back at catcher, but I think the league had already sort of decided they weren't sold on him as a catcher when he went into free agency, and the Cardinals were the team he ended up with. I don't know what the other options were going to be for Wilson Contreras. And any team signing him probably was doing so more because of the bat. The Cardinals had the obvious opening at catcher, and so they tried to make it work. And I'm not saying that Wilson was even really ever given a fair shake of what he was behind the plate. But certainly at this point, after not catching this past year, would be maybe more difficult to imagine him at his age 34 season coming up as he turns 34 in May. Maybe more difficult to see him getting back into that type of role somewhere. So I think anybody looking to trade for him would be doing so for the bat, but you'd be getting a very productive one. I think Wilson Contreras is still a middle-order bat when you think about somewhere 2 through 6 in a contending lineup. I absolutely think he fits that bill, and who knows? If you take him out of Busch Stadium, where I don't know offhand what the splits are, but I can take a look and see kind of where he was home versus road. But in theory, you might have an easier time hitting in some other ballparks. And that was indeed the case for Wilson this past season. 752 home OPS, 824 on the road. It's just a difficult place. It suppresses home runs. It suppresses runs and offense. And so that was the case as well for Wilson in 2024. 781 OPS at home, 907 on the road. I think you take Wilson Contreras and put him into more of a net neutral home ballpark. I think his numbers probably actually increase all 3 years. Checking out 2023. Less of a significant difference there that year, but he was an 804 at home and an 847 on the road. So all 3 years with the Cardinals, Wilson Contreras has been a demonstrably better hitter on the road, and I think that's fair because it's difficult to hit at Busch. Difficult to hit the way that he hits by hitting home runs and, being a power bat. I think you can do that more easily in other ballparks, and Busch Stadium is one of the toughest places to do it. So I think any team that would be getting him would be getting a good one. The question is going to be whether or not the Cardinals are, I guess there's two questions. Whether or not the Cardinals are, what are they willing to take for him with a couple of years remaining on that contract? Do you accept him as a middle order bat in your lineup, knowing that it's more of a first base DH conglomeration, and that's kind of what Alec Burleson can serve as well? Or, do the Cardinals say, hey, if we can get a piece that is cheaper and maybe a bat that can give us a chance to replace Wilson Contreras down the road, whatever the position may be, or do you try to get an arm because you need to use whatever you have at your disposal to get better in the pitching department? And the other question is, where is Wilson willing to go? And that could be a more difficult question to answer because he is happy to be in St. Louis and I think sees himself as a guy that could be, a veteran presence on a young team and help kind of give back in that way and be kind of a stability element for the Cardinals, but also continue to be his fiery self and kind of show, young guys that could be a way to do things as well. So I'll be very curious to see what happens with all three of these guys. If I had to guess as of today, I think Arenado will be gone. I think they will find a fit for Sonny Gray and trade him more likely than not. I'm 60-40 on that one. I'm less of the belief that Wilson will be traded, but I'm not going to rule it out entirely. I'll go like 30-70. 30 that he's traded, 70 that he's still here, but that certainly still leaves room for, I think, the Cardinals to quietly look for deals and then bring it to Wilson's front door and say, hey, dear, this would be on the table for you. We know what you have said, but if this is something that works for you, it works for us. Now, how much time does Chaim Bloom spend working on those deals, knowing that it could happen the same way that it did with Arenado? And heck, in that case, John Mozeliak had a list and Houston was on it and spent resources and time and energy trying to put together the deal and then still to be told no. I don't know exactly how hard the Cardinals will work for a deal without knowing, that Wilson may have sort of an appetite for it. But look, if there's some preliminary talks with the team, could they easily go to him and say, hey, we might have a framework here with XYZ. Would that be a place you're willing to go? And if you think it is, then we'll continue down this path. If not, totally get it. And, we'll be happy to have you, but the circumstances as well as we do. And so we're going to at least bring this to you and let you decide. I think that would be a more than appropriate way to handle it. We'll see the way that the Cardinals do it, but let me know, who do you think of these three big name stars will be traded by the Cardinals this offseason, and who do you think might still be around when we get to Jupiter in February of 2026? That'll do it for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys for tuning in, and we will talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.